Hello everyone, Sotius here, and today we are going to be having a chat with Jon and Tom from Flintlock Studios about their upcoming title, Lithic. Please be aware that any footage shown throughout this video is pre-alpha and everything is subject to change, so what you see in this video is not necessarily a representation of the final game. Hello! Lovely to meet you both.
Good to hear from you.
Alright, well let's get straight into it, shall we? So, first off, why don't you guys tell me a little bit about yourselves and Flintlock Studios in general?
Right, well, I'm Tom. I'm the lead developer. I suppose I came into game development a roundabout way, really. I've been a game modder and that kind of thing for a very long time. When I was at university, there wasn't actually the option to do anything to do with games development. It's a kind of a new thing. We started Flintlock a couple of years ago as an idea. We established as a business last year, really with the idea that indie games can be a little bit more in-depth. What we wanted to see was people really trying to push the boundaries of what you can do as a small indie, especially with, at that point, the software we saw coming up on the horizon, so updates to Unity, what Substance Design, what algorithmic we're doing with Substance Designer and Substance Painter and that kind of thing, physically based rendering coming over the horizon. We kind of saw all that and thought, hang on, if we're going to do this, now's the time to do it, because the technology is going to exist in the next 12 months for us to deliver something which, all right, we haven't got a 250-strong design team in a AAA studio, but we can do.
It's amazing what small teams can do.
We can get as close as we can get.
Exactly. Jon?
Jon's got anything to add on that?
Sorry. I didn't know whether Tom was finished then, so I was just sort of riding it. Well, I'm Tom. I am the lead designer at Flintlock Studios. Tom actually brought me into the studio. Sort of a random phone call one day just saying, how would you like to make video games? I was like, yeah, I would really like to make video games.
That's a good way to start.
Yeah. I just actually finished my degree in history, so not really video games related. But I mean, like Tom said, when he was at uni, he couldn't do anything games design, so he came through from modding. And I, at the time, had been quite an active member in a lot of communities, and I originally came onto the team to sort of help with story development, because I'm a sort of avid sort of personal writer in my spare time. I mean, not that I release anything to the public, I just sort of write for myself and no one else, and this was sort of almost like an opportunity to write for video games. And I was also going to do community management, and that was only just, I mean, that was about 18 months ago when I came in, and now I've sort of stepped away from community management an awful lot. And
have you done any sort of writing on the side of Lithic for the kind of backstory and stuff like that?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, I've constantly thinking and expanding the story in my mind. I'm currently developing internally the actual gameplay, how the levels are going to play out for the campaign modes for the different races, but all the actual background lore is pretty much set in stone now. I just need to embellish on my words.
Very interesting. Now, off topic a little bit. Am I correct in assuming you're quite the World of Warcraft fan?
Yeah. Much to everybody in the office, I do get a fair ribbing for that one. I mean,
really?
You probably noticed my profile picture is
I do, yes.
Mirrored in Bronzebeard at the moment. So.
I used to be quite a fan myself, yes.
Yeah, it's always the way it used to be. You never leave, you'll be back.
We'll see. Right, now on to the burning question. What exactly is Lithic?
We get asked this one a lot. I think it's very hard to sum it up briefly. We didn't really set out thinking, right, we want to make a game in this genre. Or we thought, we don't want to make an RTS. We don't want to make an RPG. We came up with the idea for Lithic, and then ever since people have said, what is it? So we've had to kind of try and find the genres it fits into. At its heart, really, it probably shares most in common in game design with God games like Populous and Black and White and things like that. But in gameplay, it shares much more in common with RTSs and RPGs. It's got the arcing storyline, and the way you develop your civilization and your tribe is a God game kind of idea. The RTS element comes in because there's resource management involved. It's not a base builder. You don't build up production buildings and then go and harvest something and use that to buy a new unit. But you do have to use the strategy part of real-time strategy to decide how you're going to spend your limited resources. The main resource in the game is your spirit points, because you use those spirit points to influence your tribe members to do things. So you can't just, if you select a character and say, right, move over there, it costs you spirit points to say that to the character. So the idea is that...
Is spirit point sort of something that you will gain as sort of people follow you, or you get more influence?
Yeah, what happens is, because we also wanted to make it as realistic's the wrong word, because it's very much a fantasy game, but as believable as we could make it. So what happens is, we also, we took our inspiration from history and historical research as well. And the idea that you need to develop culture, but in order to develop a culture, you need to have time to do that. So, especially in the early game, most of the characters' time is taken up in just trying to find enough food to get through the day, and to make sure, if there's a winter coming, they've got food for the winter, and that their shelters are built and that kind of thing. As they get more skilled and develop better tools to perform those tasks, they can do them faster. So they then get free time. And in that free time, depending on their class and their personality types, they will then do things which will generate culture for you. And the more culture a character has, when they undertake religious activity, they gain you more spirit points. So the idea is that you, especially early game, we're trying to design it that the early stage of the game is you're trying to just, the focus of the player should be on, right, get free time, get these jobs done quicker, so my characters can start decorating their clothing, for example. And the idea is that each character has a culture point value, which doesn't change. It's not spent. They're not points you spend, is what I mean. But the higher their culture value, when they make a little clay idol of the spirit animal that you're playing as, or something like that, that will generate more spirit points for you if their culture is higher. You'll also be able to use culture to act as a bribe, if you like. So there's other tribes in the world who aren't being governed by one of these creator spirits. So not everybody you meet is, if you like, controlled by a creator spirit. They're not an opponent tribe. The idea is that the higher your culture, when you meet them, they will start to mimic you. And the player never gets direct control of them, but because they start to mimic what your tribe does, they will then, in the late game, become the people who gather the food. So they'll be gathering food and bringing it to your tribe in tribute, which means that your tribe members have got time to specialize as priests and warriors and people who've got all the free time they need to develop spirit points, or to fight battles, or to find out new ways to use herbs and things like that. So that's the strategy element of it.
That's very interesting.
The role play element of it is that each character is an individual, and they've got a stat line that would be familiar with anybody who's played something like Skyrim or Divinity or something like that. Each character's got their own character sheet, and they're completely individuals.
As you said, the characters are individuals. Is there a lot of kind of micromanagement within the game?
No, we're trying definitely to avoid that, because neither of us are big fans of the micromanagement. We've got a fairly robust AI system we've written in, which means that they take care of all their everyday needs. So a gatherer, for example, will go and get food for themselves, and then they'll go and check if there's enough food for the rest of the tribe for the day. And depending on their personality types, and they might decide there is or there isn't, and they should look after themselves. That's the idea.
Nice. You've briefly mentioned a few games already. What kind of inspirations did you draw upon when you were kind of designing Lithic?
Do you want to take this, John?
Yeah, it was quite a wide array, and at the same time, almost at the beginning, there wasn't really much inspiration from other games. Like we were saying before about how we came up with the idea of Lithic almost independently from others, and then we drew from, say, take Middle-earth, Azeroth, mentioning World of Warcraft again, I know, massive nerd, and we sort of asked ourselves, well, what happens in these societies which are now developed and everybody's using magic. What happens in one of these worlds when it's at the very beginning, when like people are just sort of crawling out of the water, you know, and developing arms. So we came up with the idea of magic being sort of another element in the world, no different to air or water. It's just something that exists, but it has a potential untapped energy. And in the world of Lithic, no one has really dabbled with it because it's dangerous and they don't really understand it. I'm not sure if you've read the backstory, but one of the tribes, the Ixan, starts dabbling with magic and
kind of mess things up a little bit.
Yeah, and so everybody knows it's there, but no one really wants to play with it, and that sort of was one concept. And then when we were developing the creative spirits, effectively our gods, and we were looking at how we have the player build more power, we looked at the Terry Pratchett idea of gods are as powerful as they are believed in. So the more people who believe in a single god, then they are more powerful. And so that's how we developed that idea of the player gaining power as they gain sort of belief and as people become more pious. And as Tom was saying, it moves out to the satellite tribes and that comes in. Gameplay elements have been, I suppose, taken from sort of the general ideas from different genres. As Tom was saying, we didn't really start to sort of almost pigeonhole it into being directly influenced by other games, and not consciously. It's not something we consciously did. It was something that sort of developed organically as we had to start putting our game into categories, because when someone asks you what sort of game is it like, you've got to have an answer for that question. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with very confused people when you say, it's like nothing you've ever played before. Well, it is kind of like little bits of games you've played before, but it draws from genres on the whole. But there's definite influence from Black and White, as has been mentioned several times, and lots of RTS games. But like Tom was saying, we've always hated micromanagement, and that was something we wanted to remove. So
I'm glad.
Yeah.
How do elements play into Lithic? I've seen elements mentioned a few times. When you choose the creative spirit you want to play as, you've got the choice of the animal, so the 6 that we're putting in, and each one of those 6, we have a 6-point personality scale for each character. So the idea is that each one of those 6 animals epitomizes 1 point on that scale. So there's aggressive and passive and selfish and selfless and proud and demure. I'm sure John can probably fill me in on which ones are which, because it slips my mind.
Well, just a couple of examples, like the Waylarth, which is the one that looks like a cross between a deadly hell pig and a small horse. That's the aggressive one. So
that's the Gerstos.
Gerstos, sorry. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, the Gerstos. It influences your tribe to be more aggressive, for example. And then you got the Aurochs, which is nice and unproud, and it will make your tribe a little less likely to throw themselves into situations which could be sort of negative.
The second choice then comes in is the element. So there's the 4 classical elements: earth, fire, water, air. What's the other one?
You did earth, fire, water, air. You did 4.
Oh, that is 4. I've lost the ability to count.
Counting's hard. It's been a long few weeks. Very long few weeks.
Yeah. And then you can choose that as well, and that influences the active and the passive spells that are available to you. We didn't want to put in a huge number of spells. So, for example, if you're playing as a fire Gerstos, then you're playing as a very aggressive animal with a very aggressive element. So your tribe will tend towards being quite aggressive towards others. It will then give you a powerful spell you can call on. In the case of the fire, I believe you can call down a big firestorm that will give you a huge advantage should you need it. But of course, it also costs you a huge amount of spirit points. So it might take several days of in-game time to require enough to cast the spell once. So the player has to be very careful about using these powerful abilities. And is it really necessary? And is it worth the penalty of, I've cast this big spell, so now I can't give many orders for the next couple of days because I've got limited spirit points. So that's, again, part of the strategy and the resource management side of it. There isn't really a huge number of resources to manage. There's essentially just the spirit points, but they're very important.
And what the idea of having such a sort of small number of spells available to the player was that we could make each spell really unique and sort of powerful and impressive, instead of having a vast array of smaller spells which sort of do similar things, that kind of thing. Sticking with the fire element, you've got your big sort of high cost spell is obviously very destructive, and it's important to remember that with these big destructive spells, they can affect your tribe as well. So you could kind of friendly fire, so you don't really want to be casting that in the middle of
I really had a flashback to my Populous days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, the volcano here is a good idea.
Yeah, here's a good idea. There goes my tribe.
Yeah, and so you got that, and then you also have sort of it's an environmental spell, like the fire element can increase the temperature in an area, which will allow your tribe to survive in colder climes. So you can it's not just all
so the spells will actually have an effect on the terrain as well.
How do you mean? They will affect
not necessarily modifying the terrain itself, but more sort of.
Yeah, they will be able to affect the biome, we're calling them. Yeah, so it'll be able to raise
like an icy area, and you use this firestorm spell. Would it then be sort of more habitable?
The big powerful spells like the firestorm spell would know. It would basically just be calling down if you're being attacked. Say there's a herd of mammoth coming towards you, and you need to divert them somewhere. You could, for example, call down a firestorm spell to kill some of them or chase them off or that kind of thing. The other side of it is you could, if you need to move through a mountain pass, for example. Well, if you were playing as a water-based spirit, you would probably have to wait until your tribe had developed enough to be able to make warm clothing. But if you were playing as a fire spirit, you might be able to just use your fire spell to make that area warm enough for a long enough time to get through it without taking penalty. So it's more that kind of use. They're more designed for that kind of thing.
Okay. And is there some sort of backstory regarding the player? Obviously, the player is some sort of god or spirit that kind of aims these tribes.
The player takes the role of one of these creator spirits, and the creator spirits themselves are sort of ethereal beings from another dimension, which makes it a bit sci-fi. But they were drawn to this particular universe by magic. They could sense it in through across interdimensional space of sorts. So it's getting a little bit sci-fi, but we think it ties in really well with the fantasy elements. So you take the role of one of these creator spirits, which isn't sort of that they're definitely real. They're not like your traditional sort of omnipotent god kind of thing. They're an actual, as tangible as something that's ethereal can be, if you know what I mean. They are an actual entity. I think that's the right word. I'll use entity.
We haven't really defined exactly what they are. At least not publicly yet. We kind of there's certain things that we're holding back because obviously we are developing a single player storyline as well, and we don't want to give away every surprise that we've got in store for it. So they are. I think the important thing is for this stage of it is they're real creatures. Mm-hmm. Exactly what they are, you're probably going to have to find out at the end game.
Fair enough. Am I correct in thinking, John, that there is a knowledge system that has you quite excited about it?
Yeah, the knowledge system is. I really like that. It draws on another one of our influences, which I didn't mention before, is Dungeons and Dragons and pen and paper RPGs, and from that sort of expanded out into every RPG. But at its root, you have sort of the idea of the feats and skills from that. So we took feats and looked at them, and we expanded upon them and turned it into what we're calling knowledge. Knowledge represents a concept or an idea, really. Through the online blogs, we looked at the idea of fishing. Are you dropped out?
No, I'm sorry. Oh, Tom?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Tom just can't hear me anymore.
Okay.
So yeah, we looked at the idea of fishing, and anybody can sort of look at fish in a pond or in a river and go, oh, I want that. I've seen other creatures eating that. I want to eat that. So they can go in and they can try and grab it with their hands.
Okay,
so they
Welcome back.
welcome back. So they don't really have the idea of actual fishing, but whilst they're attempting to catch fish with their hands, they could, have an epiphany and sort of be like, oh, if I had something I could stab it with, this would be a lot easy. And then they've had sort of like a eureka moment as such. And they've come up with the idea of spearfishing, which unlocks the knowledge fishing 1. So using spearfishing, they can then tie that into their gathering skill, and they'll be able to fish more efficiently using the spear. And then whilst they're using the spear, it could progress again further onwards, and it could be like, oh, there must be a better way of doing this. And if someone else in the tribe or they themselves have come up with the idea of weaving, sorry, my brain's gone, weaving reeds together, then they could put the idea of fishing and weaving together, and they could be like, oh, and then they've developed the idea of a net. I can just swing this through the water and catch them even easier. And that ties back into the idea of getting more free time in your tribe. If your tribe can gather food faster, more efficiently, then it sort of has a knock-on sort of snowball effect down, and you can quite quickly feed your tribe and have more spare time.
Very nice. Now, talking more about the knowledge system, I read up a little bit about that it's actually possible to lose said knowledge.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that it felt like it had a continuity and a purpose. So each character has their own knowledge tree, their own tech tree, if you like. So just because one character has come up with the knowledge of, say, to take that further example of how to use a net. So, for example, if one character's out fishing with a spear and they come up with the idea to use a net, it doesn't then automatically mean that everybody else knows that. The only person who knows that is them. So if they come up with this fantastic idea and then they're on their way back to the camp and they get attacked by a saber-toothed cat and killed, for example, then that knowledge is lost again. Somebody else has to come up with it. However, if they do get back, then depending on how they spend their free time, they could then use that to teach that knowledge to somebody else. So it's the idea that the knowledge is kind of the idea of what to do, and the skill is the ability at doing it. So we wanted to try and kind of find a way to make the way that knowledge develops in the real world be quite well represented in the game. And it's the idea that just because once somebody, for example, knows how to fish with a net, they'll probably not pass on the ability to have how to fish with your hands or with a spear. So as you get towards the mid and the late game, your tribe might very well know how to fish with a net, but then if for whatever reason they lose that ability, so they might lose the access to the resource they need to make the nets, for example, they don't all automatically then know how to fish with a spear just because they can fish with a net. So they have to start again all the way back from scratch.
Yeah, sounds right. So very lifelike in a sense.
That's what we're going for.
Obviously, modern day man can't go into forest and go, hey, I can make a fire, I can survive.
That's exactly what we're drawing on.
Such as myself would be pretty screwed in survival situations.
Unless we had Google.
Unless we have Google on some abandoned island. Now, can I pick your brains a little bit about game development? What has kind of been the hardest sort of obstacle you've had to overcome when it comes to Lithic?
In a purely development tech side, I think it's probably been when we were working in the Unity 5 beta early on. We were fortunate to have very early access to Unity 5, so from day one, pretty much, we've been developing in Unity 5. However, of course, with it being a beta and not on public release, there was very little documentation, and bugs would crop up that weren't documented. So constantly having, reporting them back to Unity, and then Unity would come out with a fix, and then the fix would break something else. And I mean, that's part and parcel of working in a beta engine, I suppose. But that was certainly at sometimes very trying to have something working one day and then it wasn't working the next day, and trying to figure out why it wasn't working and that kind of thing. The time-consuming wise was our switch over when we decided to use full PBR rendering. It wasn't really difficult, but it just meant that essentially every texture asset in the project had to be rehashed and redone, which was quite a lot of man hours to get all that ready. We're happy with the result though, because it renders much. We believe it. I think it renders much nicer now than it did before. Some of our early gameplay footage is quite on the basic side, I think, compared to what we have now.
Well put. Well put.
How long has Lithic been in development?
We've solid development just over 6 months, 6-7 months now. We spent quite a lot of time before that prototyping, testing out different ideas. Is this idea actually possible within the software, or what's the best way to render this and that kind of thing. About 6 months, we've actually the current build we're working on, which is the one we'll be aiming for early access release, has been in development.
Fair enough. Do you have any plans to add some sort of multiplayer to the game, or would it simply not work in relation to what the story of the game is?
Yeah, we get asked this one a lot as well. We quite early on, when we were coming up with the design, we were looking at making a multiplayer game. However, as the game, from a technical point of view, it isn't really. That's not the blocker. It's the issue for us is that we're not quite sure what we do with the game, because it isn't designed for one side versus another kind of thing. So at the minute we don't, but it's more because we're not really sure what you would do in a multiplayer game of Lithic, if that makes any sense.
What it would entail.
Fair enough.
It isn't like a first-person sandbox survival, where you can meet people and trade with them and that kind of thing.
Right.
To begin with, if you had two tribes in there played by other people, the tribes wouldn't even be able to communicate because they would speak languages as different as English and Chinese.
If they spoke languages at all.
Yeah, if they've even developed the point of speech yet. So it's very difficult for us to really. We haven't 100% ruled it out, but unless we can come up with a way that we know it would work and it would work well, we don't want to shoehorn it in just so we can go, oh, we've got a multiplayer game, I think, is what we're looking at the minute.
I think another one of the big issues with it would be the pacing. You see it with a lot of sort of long play games where you'd need everybody to be present at the same time. I don't think you'd ever finish a game because it's the pacing on it. It's not glacial, but it's not exactly rapid fire.
Yeah. I think the nearest comparison to that is probably anyone who's ever tried to play a multiplayer campaign in any of the Total War games.
I was about to mention that. Yeah. It can take
a long time, and we're not really sure it would work at the moment. I think that's about it. We don't want to promise multiplayer and then know that we just release a substandard product. So,
are there any other features that we haven't quite covered yet that you guys would like to mention?
Well, there's definitely the character customization. Unlike most RTSs, I'm trying to think of an RTS that does character customization, but each character has got a level of customization which you'd find in something like Skyrim. So they all look different. They've all got different textures. They've all different hair colors, shapes, all that kind of thing. And we're using Substance Designer to do that. So what we wanted to make sure is that because each character's got their individual knowledge and that kind of thing, we need them to look like an individual as well. So they've got their own personalities, and their appearance is also based off their statistic block. So there's a certain amount of customization the player can do on their tribe leader when they get a new tribe leader, but on each member of the tribe, their appearance is based off their physical statistics. So a stronger character looks stronger.
This is my next question.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say, do you have to kind of do them on an individual basis, or is it kind of, it sort of generates them based on certain
everyone
aspects?
Everyone apart from the player's tribe leader, which was called the Alpha, they have a level of customization over them. However, it's still a case of their main overall physical appearance is based off the statistic block. So if you want a strong lead, a very physically strong leader, they're going to look very physically strong. It's
fair enough. Now, I see the game is currently undergoing a Kickstarter campaign. Obviously, Kickstarter can be a bit iffy at times.
Yeah.
God forbid that it fails. Do you guys have any sort of contingency plan should that happen? Like, how will that impact development of Lithic?
We do have contingencies for that. Obviously, we have to be quite careful about explaining exactly what they are. But essentially, we would be looking at delaying the release of Lithic, simply because at the minute the main thing we're lacking, the reason we're running this Kickstarter is because we're lacking animations for it, really. And we don't have the facility in-house to make those at the moment. I don't know if John's got anything to add.
No.
So really, we'd be delaying development of it for some time until we could pick it up again, unfortunately.
Now, am I correct in thinking that we will be seeing a sort of playable early access version of Lithic, if all goes well?
Oh yes. We're aiming for the date of the playable early access is also dependent on the Kickstarter. Anyone would like to look at the Kickstarter page, we'll see our promises on that. That if we can get the animations in with the successful Kickstarter campaign, then we should be looking at an early access within the next few months. The idea of the early access is that it will be an early access. We expect it to be buggy and things like that, and it won't be fully feature complete. There'll be one playable race and one playable biome, with no single player storyline written in yet. So essentially, playing it initially in early access, you'd be able to play as the Huan in the temperate biome in the random generated skirmish mode. We would be expanding on that very quickly because once that's in. But yeah, we'd like to get an early access out so we can start to get direct feedback from people who've actually played the game as well.
Yeah, that will greatly help. It's always a good thing. And what are your plans for Lithic once it's released? Will you continue adding content, or will you have Lithic completed and be moving on to another project?
That's a good question. With Lithic, we sort of at the start as a studio, and especially personally, I think that it's quite easy for games to slip into a almost perpetual beta where they're constantly getting new features added to them instead of being polished and then finished as a game. What we'd like to do, or especially what I'd like to do, is to get Lithic to exactly where we want it and get it feature complete. And then if we're exactly happy with it and there's nothing that we feel we need to change, we'd probably go and look at another project. That's not to say that we wouldn't be revisiting Lithic or the universe we built it in at a future date, but I personally don't believe in games sort of sitting in a permanently updated form.
That's understandable. I can agree with you.
I mean, Once we've our full list of features is on the Kickstarter as well. We've put that up and we said this is what Lithic is going to contain. We aren't going to add any more. We're definitely not going to do DLC or anything like that. Once you've bought Lithic, you've got Lithic. Anything will be released as updates on the early access. And once the early access is complete and the game's complete, apart from obviously bug fixing and anything like that,
right,
then that'll be the end of development for Lithic.
Sounds good. And where can the viewers find out more about the game?
Oh, all over the internet. We've currently got a Kickstarter campaign going, which you can find if you just search for Lithic the game on Kickstarter. We're also available on Twitter, where we're tweeting all day, which is also at Lithic the game. You can follow the studio as well if we're a little bit more casual on the studio and we talk about things other than just Lithic on there. That's at Studio Flintlock. We've got our own website as well, where there's plenty of updates on Lithic, and there's a weekly dev blog, so you can find out all sorts about the different systems. There's probably hundreds of pages of text on there to read if anyone's interested. That is flintlockstudios.co.uk. That's all one word, Flintlock Studios. We're also on Indie Database if you look at Lithic. on Steam Greenlight as well. If you search Lithic on Steam Greenlight, we keep that updated. There's links through to everything else from there. I'm trying to think of where else we are on the internet.
I think
we got an Instagram as well. There you go, Becky and marketing shouting across the office. We got an Instagram. Is that just if you just search for Lithic the game on there? Is it? No. Flintlock Studios on Instagram, and there'll be pictures of Tom wearing a paper bag on his head and everything. So that's definitely worth checking out.
All right, thank you so much, guys, for taking time out of your busy day to
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It sounds fantastic. Thank you. I shall add all links to everything you mentioned in the description of the video.
Okay.
And I shall end it right there.
Okay.